Even his own side know he's not on the side of working people. That's why the only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce.
The British Conservative Party will have been in power for 15 years by the next regularly scheduled general election, but the party is struggling to craft a message that resonates with the British public, and even to get members in the party themselves to agree on what they stand for. As you might already know, the UK has had 3 different prime ministers just since September, and all of them have been members of the Conservative Party. There's Boris Johnson, who first came to power in 2019 and promised to get Brexit done. The UK did leave the European Union in 2020, but Boris faced a lot of different scandals during his time in power. Most notably, he was accused of violating his own government's lockdown rules to hold parties with his staff. These scandals led to over 50 different members of Johnson's party quitting their positions in protest of his leadership, and he eventually resigned, paving the way for a leadership contest between Liz Truss, his former Foreign Secretary, and Rishi Sunak, his former Chancellor of the Exchequer and head of the British Treasury. Liz Truss got her chance at Prime Minister first, after winning a majority of votes from paying Conservative Party members, the only people who were actually allowed to vote in the ballot to replace Boris Johnson. During her first days on the job, Truss was quite clear about what she wanted to do during her time in office.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth.
Truss quickly rolled out her so-called mini-budget, which would have included the UK's biggest tax cut since 1972, but the fact that £45 billion of lost revenue were expected to be financed for by increased borrowing was not something that was well received.
Now the British pound has fallen to its lowest level ever against the US dollar.
The market turmoil, a direct result of new government plans to cut taxes and increase borrowing.
Just adding to your debts with something that isn't going to actually generate growth, which I think is most economists' point of view, is a recipe for disaster.
A lot of British voters were also upset about whose taxes were actually being cut. One of the proposals in the first edition of the mini-budget was a plan to completely eliminate the UK's highest individual marginal tax rate of 45% on incomes over £150,000. That proposal would have affected about 660,000 people, and it was quickly scrapped from the mini-budget, but not before the damage was done, and headlines like these had a chance to dominate the British news cycle. As markets tanked and the value of the pound dropped to its lowest level in a long time, so did Liz Truss's approval rating. Within 6 weeks of Truss taking office, 80% of British voters disapproved of her job as Prime Minister, making her the most unpopular PM in the history of modern British polling. Liz Truss was so heavily criticised by her opposition in Parliament that when she didn't show up for a weekly meeting in the House of Commons, a Conservative minister was forced to address a question about whether the PM was hiding under her desk.
And all we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away.
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady. I can assure the House.
By the time a British tabloid set up a live stream with a head of lettuce to see if that would last longer than Truss's remaining time in office, it was already over. And when Truss resigned a week later, she became the shortest serving Prime Minister in British history. With Liz Truss gone, Rishi Sunak is now the new Prime Minister, and he's actually claimed vindication for a lot of what he said over the summer about Liz Truss's proposals being financially irresponsible.
Inflation is the enemy that makes everybody poorer. It erodes your savings. It erodes your living standards. So I don't think the responsible thing to do right now is launch into some unfunded spree of borrowing and more debt. That will just make inflation worse. It will make the problem longer.
Yet Sunak is now the head of a Conservative Party that is facing some of its worst polling numbers in years, and that has gone through 5 different Prime Ministers just since 2016. The truth is, the Conservative Party is deeply divided between a number of different factions. There's a small government economically liberal group led by people like Liz Truss, who also support easing Britain's immigration rules to boost economic growth. There's also a strongly pro-Brexit group that pushed for the original referendum and liked Boris Johnson's message of just getting it done. Boris himself ran on a platform that was both very comfortable with a strong British national identity.
We shouldn't be shy, we shouldn't be embarrassed about teaching that in our schools.
But also with high levels of government spending. One of his signature programs was Levelling Up Initiative, which went towards high-speed trains and city infrastructure, particularly in places like North England, and that one UK think tank estimated could cost the country up to £2 trillion. There's also another wing of the Conservative Party that never really supported Brexit that much to begin with, and would look favourably on opportunities to reintegrate the UK more into the European Union in the future.
In any other country in the world, or at least in Europe, the Conservative Party would be divided into 4 different parties that are standing against each other and would probably form a coalition at the end of it.
That's Robert Tyler, a senior policy advisor for New Direction, a free market think tank founded by Margaret Thatcher. He's also a member of the Conservative Party, and he's witnessed many of its internal struggles firsthand.
What you end up with is coalitions of different factions at different times. So under David Cameron, you effectively had what we call one nation conservatism. This is the old school kind of statist version of conservatism allied with liberal conservatism. And on the outside were traditionalists. Then comes Theresa May, who in many ways is a traditional conservative married to the one nation conservatism with the liberals on the outside. And then you get Boris, who comes in with the liberals, one nation, and the traditionalists. And you have all of these different sort of, building blocks, and they're put together in different patterns, different organizational structures.
The Conservative Party's reliance on coalition building has meant that different consecutive Conservative Party prime ministers have taken just about opposite perspectives on the UK's biggest political issues. The most obvious example of this is Brexit itself. David Cameron, who originally called for the referendum in the first place, actually wanted the UK to stay in the European Union, and he resigned after Leave won the campaign. Theresa May, who came after him, also originally supported Remain, and the fact that she had so much difficulty in negotiating a deal to get the UK out of the European Union was something that was a bit funny to certain British comedians.
Imagine if you and 10 of your friends were in a Burger King, right? And you said, listen, who wants to leave the Burger King? And 6 people were like, we want to leave the Burger King. And then somebody who didn't want to leave the Burger King was like, I'll get us out there. I'll have a word with the manager. I'll get us a deal. It's like, do we need a deal? No, you can't leave without a deal. I'll get a deal. You want to leave? Yeah, I'm going to get us a deal, right? So she goes to talk to the manager. She comes back 2 years later.
After Theresa May came Boris Johnson, who said he was willing to get the UK out of the EU no matter what, even if that meant a no-deal Brexit, something that would have had huge consequences for the British economy, the Northern Irish border, and the UK's ability to cooperate with the European Union on issues of security. But even Boris Johnson wasn't always rock solid on Brexit. During the 2016 referendum, he actually penned 2 different op-eds, one in support of Leave and the other in support of Remain, only deciding at the last second to publish the one in favour of getting the UK out. The fact that Conservative Party leaders have taken just about every position possible on Brexit might sound incoherent, but for some, it's actually just evidence of British democracy working. And to be clear, they're definitely not the only ones that have been hard to pin down on specific topics. The former head of the rival Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, actually was a strong Eurosceptic himself until the Brexit referendum, and even there, his unwillingness to come out strongly in favour of Remain was something that frustrated a lot of people in his party. Even so, many critics of the Conservative Party see its changing positions as symptoms of a broader problem. One of those critics is Herman Kelly, a social conservative and a Eurosceptic from Ireland who founded the right-wing Irish Freedom Party.
The Tory MPs who are in there seem completely without principle, that they decide or they judge policy and Prime Minister by popularity rather than any principle that they have or any goal that they seek to achieve. And it would make, I think, the public very cynical.
Under Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Party is going to have to work hard to figure out what it stands for. But there are some things, like support for Ukraine, that still unify just about all factions of the party. As for Sunak himself, he's got an interesting blend of different Conservative Party positions. He supports Brexit, and he's pushed for tough on crime measures and increased police funding, but he also supports many of Boris Johnson's COVID-19 spending policies which he helped implement, things like furlough schemes and eating out initiatives to help struggling restaurants. The challenge for Sunak going forward is going to be figuring out whether he can actually get enough support in his party to get his proposals done, because if he can't, the lettuce is probably ready for round 2. Truss quickly rolled out her so-called mini-budget, which would include... Truss quickly rolled out her so-called mini-budget, oh my gosh.